No,
What? She snuck it in, but she didn't.
I did not. Dab, please tell me you were joking.
No, yeah,
He's
when
totally
people dab.
joking. He's acting
It's
like he doesn't know what
dab.
that. He knows it's a dab. He's
You
not.
better.
He's totally.
That's what I said. I said dab. Yeah, I said what you said.
It's the rusty robot. Everybody does the rusty robot.
Like
That's
when
what
you're
all the
sitting
young
on the
kids.
toilet? Like when
That's what all the.
constipate.
I think I'm
Yeah,
okay with people.
Oh,
People can do the rusty robot. We've been live for a bit. People can do the rusty robot wherever they want. That's what makes it such a versatile dance move. The kids love
it. And so do I. And we are excited. You've stumbled into the Rusty Robot. We don't know what dabbing is. And we are the Suicide Prevention social media chat. Hashtag SPSM. I'm your intrepid moderator at Doc Foreman. Tony Wood is ghosting around but cannot broadcast right where he is right now. Everybody do a shout out to Tony Wood. Tony Wood is something at a something called Quantify, and he's the board chair. I don't remember all the adjectives. He's the board chair of the American Association of Suicidology. Join today at suicidology.org. We are excited because I think our conference is launching a link to to register, right? Chris, is that coming? Chris?
Chris is
frozen up.
Chris is frozen. Oh, wait, no, he's not. He's just not paying attention to us, April. I think there's a big difference.
No. There you are. So, Chris, suicidology.org. What's coming on suicidology.org?
The website is up. I'm totally kidding. Registration for the 51st annual conference for AAS is live currently. Go and register. Make sure you get your hotel rooms because they are going to sell out super fast. Bart's over here dapping.
It's a rusty robot dab.
Okay.
We also want to give out a shout out to Jess Stolman Rainey, who says that she's missing tonight for the Royal Rumble because, quote, I prefer spandex drama and 30 people wrestling at once. And so somehow SPSM is included with the chat at WWE. At WWE, I like spandex too. That's what Spanx are for. That being said, Dr. Bart Andrews, say hi to the people.
What's going on, everybody? It is Dr. Bart Andrews out of St. Louis, a groovy little crisis center in St. Louis, Missouri, behavioral health response. Excited about the show tonight. Excited to learn more about what Avatar training is. April was giving me an earlier tutorial about what Avatar training is and is not. And we did have a brief conversation and a dispute that was settled respectfully and with no hurt feelings, which is the way we roll here at SPSM, by the way. Yeah, I'm missing Tony. I miss Tony's face. Tony's is in Dallas. So if you're cyber stalking Tony and you want to know where he is, look in Dallas. It's a small metropolitan area deep in the heart of Texas.
I think if you just pull a Tony and geolocate somebody for a couple of years, you can always, without them knowing, you can always know where they are. Somebody do that to Tony for me, please. That wasn't creepy when we found that out at all.
Geotag Tony. That'd be a great, right? Geotag Tony.
Chris, did you get to introduce yourself, or did I just make you introduce a link?
You just really made him do AAS stuff and didn't all acknowledge him as a person, as a separate individual from AAS, as somebody that might have their own hopes, dreams, desires, goals, family, and role as a human being.
All of that is false. Also, if we are trying to cyber stalk Tony, Bart, you just made it super easy for a lot of people. So that was.
I narrowed it down.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Maxwell. I'm communications coordinator for the American Association of Suicidology. I am currently in DC. If you're cyber stalking me, now you know. I'm here to do my first week on site for AAS, and I'm super thrilled. Like I said, the registration is live for the conference. Make sure you go get your registration in and your hotel room. I'm not kidding about the hotel rooms.
The registration is live. Wait, the registration is live with the
and the hotel was already booked up
Everything is live
for the pre-conference. The hotel books up Guys, last year we had record-breaking attendance and SPSM dinners. All like I think we ended up with 2 and a couple parties, and the hotel books up fast. I cannot emphasize enough. Get your hotel room now. Get your roommate now. Start on your dinner plans now, because that's how we roll.
So are you saying that it's already too late to book the hotel for the pre-conference?
For the night before, yeah.
Wow.
You can try it.
When did the registration come out?
Registration went live Friday afternoon.
Got it.
The hotel bookings have been up for a while though, so I think people are kind of jumping on. Yeah.
I know people were asking about that online today, though. So first of all, do come. Like if AIS is in a city near you, do come. Do get the membership because it discounts your conference thing. And do come hang out. There's a bunch of folks from the chat that hang together for a lot of the conference. Some people like sort of join the social media crew and really amplify the reach about messaging about suicide and about research and things like that. Had a really cool initiatives underway. 2016 was Lick SPSM. Last year was the Poop Illuminati. We do all sorts of fun things while we're there, and we'd love to see you. And we get nothing for saying this. We're a little extroverted. That being said, I'm really excited for a couple of things this week. First of all, I got to go to the VA's Sim Learn Center in Orlando, and I got to work on some simulation training products, which I'm not cleared to talk about much, but we know a little bit about, I don't know whose the echo's on. There may be a little bit of some feedback. I don't know if that's Chris or Bart, real quick. So there may be, so I can't talk about specifically things like that unless I'm cleared to do that, other than to say, I had a day at work and it happened. But we can talk a little bit about avatar-based training, which I want to talk about because, we've had folks from Cognito on the show before. We've had Dr. Melissa Pinto talking about avatar-based patient sort of practice visits to primary care clinics. We've talked about Second Life. It was one of our very first SPSM chats, and we really want to talk about how digital platforms have really evolved and how this training has progressed. Because, it may be, in fact, that the technology gets sophisticated enough that you can do some really interesting simulation training at scale, but then you're going to need experts to work on it, and therein is sort of where the rubber meets the road. That being said, let's talk a little bit about what an avatar is. Bart Andrews, you had some thoughts about that.
I did.
Bart, if you could unmute yourself, you're not unmuting.
How about now?
Yes.
I wonder how we're doing with the feedback. Are you getting feedback? A little bit. So you were explaining to me that an avatar is any avatar-based training is any training where there's a graphic that represents you in the training. Is that in fact correct? Right. I think that's. So in other words, if there's if you're doing e-learning, and in the e-learning there's a little figure in the bottom that's supposed to be you, then it's technically avatar training. You as the learner. Is that accurate? According to the definition, I would say that's ridiculous. So in my opinion, an avatar should be at least something that that represents you, that it engages in some meaningful way. And I would actually say it should move or do something. That's just me. I don't know if I'm just, an avatar snob of some kind, or I'm demanding high-tech avatars, or if I just want my avatar to live a little bit. But in theory, we had this discussion pre-show, and in theory, Twitter's avatar-based because you have an avatar that is on every tweet. So in that way, Twitter's avatar-based, correct?
Sort of. In some respects. So avatar, like your digital avatar could be something as sophisticated as like Second Life or SimWorld, where you have a sim character that's moving through an environment. But it could be something relatively, stick figure-ish, right? It could be relatively low tech, or it could be relatively low low immersiveness. So what Bart is really referring to is how immersive and how sort of true to life the avatar is, right? And everybody loved the James Cameron movie. You guys remember when we did an avatar thing on like making cool avatars like on our Facebook pages and things like that way back in the day? I think the graphics are still on the SPSM Facebook page. You guys remember that? No, that was like one of our first years we were talking about that. So like not everything is James Cameron, like you're in someone else's body and it feels like virtual reality, right? So the more realistic it is, the more immersive it is, right? The more it feels like an in vivo experience.
So Bitmoji, you're saying Bitmoji is an avatar, right? You're saying Bitmoji-ish?
You know, it's like very unimmersive.
It's unimmersive, but it represents and depict feeling at a particular time, right?
April?
We're trying to manage feedback noises, but you know, if something's representing you and you can make it say or do things like I have my little picture and I can change my Twitter message and interact with other people, and I have sort of a picture that represents me on a very, very simplistic level, that's what's happening. Now, simulation's a little different. So when you're in a simulation training, you know, this is something that is meant to replicate real life. And largely, the simulation is pre-programmed in some way, and it may be altered by someone in a control booth, or but oftentimes simulations are automatic, right? And they can be very, very simplistic, which is you are, you know, given you're doing a didactic, and we want you to practice motivational interviewing. The client says one thing, and you're given 4 choices to respond, and you don't get to move on until you pick one of those 4 choices. Right? And so you're going to get stuck on the script, and you can just click one of them and eventually get through, which isn't, you know, which isn't very fluid, right? But you can do it. Versus things that really mimic natural language, that have sort of an artificial intelligence or an NLP component. And so when you're working on something, you know, you could talk to people, and you could, you know, maybe you missed the boat on something, but you keep going, and you could come back, ask another question. You could get somewhere, and the alliance could really, and the rapport could be really, really solid, or it could be really shaky, and you could take more time with it trying to get to the end, right? It could be kind of a messier interaction, but the simulation is sophisticated enough to accommodate a wide variety of things that you can do. I have to tell you, having now had some, you know, where we've been tasked for doing that, it is a lot of work. I think, I'm sure none of you guys have done skits and role plays, right? Bart, you don't seem like a skit kind of guy.
I love skits and role plays. In fact, role plays are some of the best training because people actually have to practice skills, and it gets them out of their comfort zone. And also, all of these things engage people in different parts of the brain. And so one of the things that we know about learning is that learning is best when it's multimodal, and that some people learn better based on their learning style. And the more aspects of learning modalities you hit, the better people remember and are able to integrate learning experiences. So role playing and skits tend to hit a bunch of those dimensions, and so they're wonderful learning tools.
And with a role play, you kind of have a general idea where you're going, who your character is, what they're going to respond to, right? Like, and when you're doing, I know, for example, Living Works, when they do assist training, there's a couple of really major like learning events that are role plays, right? And simulations are just a sort of a digital version of that. But it's really, really hard to mimic at scale using digital technology, like what you can do with a really good role play. Bart, are we allowed to talk about the bridge scenario and the assist training?
I mean, in general terms, that there's a role play, that there's all kinds of different role plays in assist. I don't think there's any violation of, I don't know.
I just brought this up because it just occurred to me.
I think that I'm trying to think, am I the echo? I wonder if I should. So I mean, so obviously there's lots of role plays in assist. I think going into detail about the bridge scenario is probably not appropriate, would be my guess.
We're not going to talk about the bridge scenario, but what you should know is that, and I know we have got some feedback, Marshman. Man, oh man, we got some feedback. But what you should know is that getting computers to do what a good role play trainer can do at scale automatically is actually fairly complex. So while role play, I don't want to say it takes minimal preparation, because I don't want to, especially people like Bart who do these trainings. I know Bart is very intensive in preparing. But for me, a role play doesn't feel like it just takes that much preparation. I sort of know like what my training objectives are, what I'm coaching, what's going to happen. I kind of have it in my head, and we show up in a room and do it. But with the avatar sort of based things, you've got to design it in, and a whole bunch of people have got to do that. And we're going to talk about sort of the cast of subject matter experts you need to design that in. And additionally, what can happen with some of these simulations is that we may be simulating someone with lived experience of suicidality. And I don't know that every simulation involves folks with lived experience in the design. I know you're shocked. And by the way, Marshman, we are going to talk about Cognito because we shared some other stuff. Cognito is just one of the sort of the larger vendors of suicide related mental health avatar-based simulation training. So it's just really hard to come by, and Cognito has just invested a lot in developing it. And I don't get any money from Cognito. Ron Goldman and I have been on a couple panels together. This is how I learned about Cognito and have got to sort of play with some of their demos. So I'm going to talk about them because they're cool with us talking about their stuff. We don't get anything for it. It's just we're allowed. So that's what we're going to use. But that's like one of the things that has really, really struck me is that we have a lot of times clinicians and suicidologists designing what people with lived experiences say in simulations. I wonder what you guys thought about that.
I think it's a bad idea for people without lived experience to be kind of figuring out how people at risk of suicide might respond in situations. But I will add this. I'll say that if you've done a lot of clinical work, you might have actually experienced a lot of different responses from people that you're working with. So I think there are definitely, if you in fact have that experience as a provider and have tried different things and have kind of a toolbox of different responses that you've gotten from people, I think it's a fine thing. It's not like it's completely absence of information. I do think it's always stronger to get people with lived experience. But I think this is one of the areas where lived experience can be very helpful in training design, for that matter, right? But I also would say that there's many clinicians that have lots of clinical experience and can certainly accurately describe responses they've gotten to things that they've done. So I think that I don't know that you always understand what those responses meant or where those responses were coming from. So it lacks maybe a certain level or richness. But I think it's much better. I think it's particularly bad when you have people who do trainings who don't have experience, either lived experience based or clinical based experience, that are then making decisions about what people in these situations, whether it's a clinician or a person at risk, might be saying. So I think there's something to be said that when you're developing these things, you're getting good input from both sides, the clinicians and people who are receiving the services, is what I would say.
Yeah, and I would absolutely ditto all of that. I also think that sometimes various trainings are trying to teach you like a certain set of listening skills or certain set of engagement, like how to engage and talk with someone, as if it is a guarantee that if you use the skills, and this is the way most simulations are set up, then the person will be like, I totally get it. I'm not going to kill myself now, and I'm going to take my medications and set up my appointment. Hooray! Right at the end. And the truth is that sometimes even if you were doing everything skillfully as a clinician, and we're talking about clinical simulations, or as like a responder, like whoever is the learner in a simulation training, I always sort of wondered if folks with lived experiences would say, like, you could be a really clinician and I might not do what you want, right? And that's how all these scenarios sort of end, which is that if you do everything right, then the client, the patient, whoever, the person at risk, does what you want. And I wondered what you guys thought about that.
Well, it's really complicated, isn't it? So it's
That's usually my line.
It's really impossible to design a training with infinite numbers of responses and possibilities, right? And so I think that you've got a real challenge in that we're trying to train people in real world scenarios, recognizing that in training you've got to limit the number of possible sets and things like that, right? You at some point you've got to limit the possible outcomes and choices, or you'll never get anywhere. So you do in fact have to recognize that any training is an attempt to approximate a real world situation in a training environment with limited choices and limited opportunities, right? Two, the other piece that you've got of this is that if you make training so impossibly difficult that the providers are trying to learn skills and they don't get reinforced for learning these skills that you're trying to teach them, you're not gonna actually shape or change behavior. Right. So you've got to there's this balance between helping people succeed and acquire new skills, which is anxiety provoking, and also making it realistic enough that there's a level of challenge, right? And so that's an ongoing balance. Everybody knows, just like with video games, if you've ever played a video game where the difficulty setting is set too hard. Oh, what I just was listening to this, like the E.T. video game, right? Yeah. The E.T. video game was so incredibly hard that, in fact, people hated it and they were taking it back and it lost millions and millions of dollars. In fact, experienced gamers were able to get through those difficult pieces. And if you can get through this difficult level, it turns out it's a pretty fun game, but it's only a fun game.
When was there an E.T. game? Weren't you like 6, Bart?
I wasn't 6 when the E.T. game came out. I was like probably 13 or 14.
And they couldn't.
I was almost 15 years old. April.
I was 8. Go ahead, Bart.
How do I can't, I'm dabbing on that.
Dad. Oh, Lord, don't ever.
And that's hurt the shoulder.
Chris. Don't throw your shoulder out again, Bart.
Oh. No, I don't really have much to add other than to echo what Bart's saying. I think you can make some of these trainings fun, right? Which sounds weird when you're talking about suicide and suicide prevention and mental health in general. You can make it engaging to a point where you actually feel like you are succeeding, but you have to work for it. And just like any other kind of video game or other like digital scenario, that is kind of that gold standard. You can find a way to do that, and if you can find a way to do that in a couple of different ways, so like there is Cognito, there are virtual reality versions that might be appearing at some point. So if you can kind of give people several different options and different ways to experience it, so they can find their preference zone. So it's still challenging for them, but they're actually feeling like they're learning things, and then they actually go out and experience those things. Good ways to do this.
Remember that the end goal is, I think there's a wonderful piece where the training can be like, the end goal is for you to learn how to do this, not for you to get the patient to do what you want. I will tell you, we got a couple of things that Tom Cruise, everybody give a shout out to Tom Cruise. This is his last SPSM stateside for a while. Tom was pointing out that simulations are used a lot in the military. And by the way, Cognito has done some products, I believe, with helping and serving the mental health needs of that population in mind. And it's no big mystery why Veterans Affairs has a sim learning center and does simulation training. The military uses it a lot. The military trains a huge number of people at a very large scale and simulation to do all sorts of things that you can't just sort of practice over and over again. So flying a plane or taking out like a fighter jet is really, really expensive to do. So we are going to reduce the costs and make it safer. So you're going to use a piloting simulation, which some people are mentioning. Tom said, simulations are good for practicing things that would give you the jitters to do if you're in the military without, to help lessen the jitters. They're great for exposure. And I think Meg Stone even said, role plays are nice, but sometimes it's a little bit, overstimulating maybe to have to do them in front of other people. So there's something about doing them privately, doing a video demo where you're going to get some exposure to the situation. It's going to allow you to relax and think. make it less threatening so that when you're in the situation for real, you're just more likely to be able to succeed. We've had a lot of comments on that. And I think that's sort of why people use simulation trainings. You can do it at scale. It can be, once you hit a certain scale, it's cost effective. You know, this is not the kind of training you develop for 30 people. This is the kind of training you develop for 300,000 people, because the development costs are fairly high. But it can provide exposure so that things aren't so scary. It can help you learn complicated skills in way lower stakes setting. You know, it's just you and a computer. On the other hand, it might oversimplify things or make it be very misleading about the purpose of the skill. So the goal is to be skillful, not necessarily control everything that's done. And I think that's something that people maybe don't realize about therapy in general. Like, it's not my goal to get you to do what I want, or at least it shouldn't be in therapy, right? Bart, you were nodding.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think there's several things around this that get really complicated. If you talk about client-centered approaches, in fact, a truly client-centered approach, the client completely decides what their goal is, right? In fact, that's why some therapies need to be very clear that they're not client-centered. This may blow everybody's minds.
Not all therapy is client-centered or non-directive. Yeah, go ahead.
And suicide prevention is not client-centered, because you actually have a very specific goal here, and that is, I want you to live. My goal is for you to stay alive, right? That is not, by definition, client-centered, because that may in fact not be the client's goal in that moment. And so being transparent about what the goal is. This is why when Jonathan Singer talks about, what is that, the family. He does that. There's that suicide prevention training that's family based, and it's escaping me.
Zing, where are you?
Where is Zing? But one of the things they talk about at the very beginning of that training, and this is not a client-centered treatment, because that goal is actually getting the family to be more involved in the child's care. And so they say this isn't client-centered because we have a very specific goal, family attachment or attachment-based suicide prevention therapy. Our goal here is for a family to be more attached. In fact, this is not client-centered. So client-centered is often a term that's really misapplied. And it's sometimes clear that we have goals that are very specific, but being transparent about those goals and making sure that's part of the informed consent process and a part of the initial discussion needs to be really clear. We don't do a lot of training around these issues, which I think is interesting.
And that's, you know, one of those things is you can learn to have difficult conversations about difficult topics that might be nerve-wracking or very high stakes if the first time you ever do it is with a quote unquote real quote unquote patient. And that's what I think is interesting. And it looks like Sally Spencer Thomas is tweeting, we've been kind of sitting on something that we wanted to tell you all about. We before we start talking about development teams that are involved in some of those specialties that need to consider working together, we need to take a break and talk about the Grammys. Chris Maxwell, communications something or other. I don't know, what's your title? Can you talk about this since you're a comms person?
Communications happy fun time person. I just gave myself that title. It's not official. So
it's not a happy
you guys might have heard that Logic had a song that came out a while ago. I think in May.
Did we do an episode on that?
I think we may have. You guys heard of Logic? So he had a song that came out that the title was just the number for the Lifeline, being nominated for best song, right? Or best artist?
Yeah, at the Grammys.
At the Grammys. And
it turns out exposure works.
Yeah. He may be performing here in a few minutes, from what I've heard.
But Sally Spencer Thomas just tweeted out a picture of being at the Grammys behind the screen.
Pretty big deal.
Folks, please do continue to follow the SPSM hashtag as we go through the Grammys in the next 20-30 minutes. We're going to be discussing avatar training, but we've been to the Grammys before in SPSM, and this year is the first year that suicide is going to be a highlighted topic about the best song of the year by Logic, which was the 1-800-273-8255 song. And the thing to remember, folks, is that media works. And I think that there are going to be a few folks from the SPSM community who are behind the stages who are going to be tweeting. if you could please, if you have lived experience, if you are out on the SPSM tag, if you could please, when you do see their tags, help them tweet out to some of the folks in the audience. My understanding is there are going to be some pretty groovy people sitting right up front during this performance when the SPSMers may, in fact, be on stage. If you could help just say hi, explain that honoring the needs of folks with lived experience at the Grammys is a really cool thing. Like that would be super helpful. Army of folks with lived experience who largely carry the social media channel for suicide prevention. Could you give us a help out while we discuss avatars? Pretty please. Sally Spencer Thomas, if you follow her tweets, she will sort of be telling you what to do. It will be coming up in the next 15 to 30 minutes is when you should start to see that really go hot, right as we're wrapping up. I'm going to pull up some of our notes. I made some really specific notes about avatar-based development teams because I was learning all about them. And, you know, you would think, because we're talking about what those wish lists are, and I think I have a tweet about that, that should be rolling in the SPSM chat any second soon, that we seem to think, you know, and I've just done a little bit of it myself, where we seem to think that there's like sort of a wish list of what an ideal training has. We do this in suicide prevention. It's informed by science and it has lived experience and we have this element and it's collaborative and it's all these sort of values. But where the rubber meets the road is actually designing something that works. And it's not the easiest thing to design something that works with all the values that you have. So we put a list of some of the really major kinds of experts that have to be at the table when you're working on these things. And I want to talk a little bit about them. So I included folks with lived expertise among all the kinds of subject matter experts. So people who are in suicidology. If you're doing suicide risk assessment and intervention, you need all kinds of folks who are experts in that from different positions. So from clinical practice to crisis intervention, to folks with lived expertise, to scientists, folks who know motivational interviewing, that kind of thing. You're looking for content experts. But it turns out that you really need also training and accreditation experts. And I can't tell you in my experience, you know, just participating in this, how many times I noted that we would come up with what we thought was a great idea. And someone would say, you know, that's just not the best way that you train people. And this would be someone who maybe didn't know as much about suicide, but they understood training and learning. Or they might say, that's really nice, but how are you going to manage accreditation for a physician, a nurse, and you know, if you do the scenario that way, you know, is this going to make sense for accreditation for a social worker and an MD? And we would have to be figuring that out because we were, you know, if you're doing something where you want to just teach somebody like general risk assessment and intervention, like a really, really generalized, you know, screening scale, you have to cover a large number of professions and they all have different accrediting bodies. And the training has to sort of work for them. And I didn't realize how often the technicalities of that impacted design choices and how we would do trainings. Bart, you do an accredited training activity. How often do you do assist? How often do you train people in assist? Or you train trainers, right?
I do both. So I do train the trainers, and I apologize. I am the reason for the sound effect. I've tried logging on and off, so something's going on with my headphone and my system. So I apologize to the audience. Yeah,
it happens.
So I do both. Getting ready to do an assist workshop as part of a T for T. So when you do a train the trainer, the first part of the T for T is actually doing the workshop. Right. Mm-hmm. And so we do both. We do regular assist trainings at BHR throughout the year. All of our new staff go through that training as part of the training process. Right. And so an assist is, again, a very deep training in the sense that it does a lot of these things that we're talking about, hitting multiple modalities, lots of practice, lots of role playing. Are a part of that, and so it uses training theory design. And this is one of the things that's really important when we think about suicide prevention training or any mental health training. There's too much emphasis at times on content, and not enough emphasis on actual learning theory and training theory, because how people learn things, and there's good science about the best ways that people pick up skills. those are things Assist has been, and the folks at Living Works have been really good about incorporating the best evidence about learning theory. How do people learn? For instance, Assist uses the adult learning model. How do adults learn? What are the best ways to train and teach adults new things? So these are things that are really important when we consider how to develop trainings. Not just that people need to know about suicide prevention, but what are the best ways for people to learn information in general, and how do we apply those to training people in suicide prevention?
And I was like, can we use the word pedagogy expert over and over again? Because I had too much, because it sounds slightly dirty. I'm like, can we bring in the pedagogy expert? Is that wrong? Is that wrong?
I don't think it's wrong. I don't really particularly like the pedagogy expert. Is that the correct term that we have to use there?
That's a person. That's like an expert in training.
Can we call them a training expert?
You don't like pedagogy? Pedagogy? I'm not sure which one it is.
I'm not really comfortable with that word. I don't know why. I like training expert better. It's just much more accessible.
Is this like Bart's moist? Like, is this the word that he draws the line with? Is that what's happening?
Moist pedagogy?
Sorry, I've done this.
Pedagogicalophobic. I don't know.
Don't put that in. This is a real mess. Absolutely. What we want to teach people and how people learn is sometimes it's not as simple as I'm telling you to do that. Now select the right answer. Like sometimes people learn by making mistakes, picking wrong answers, just having things modeled and sort of unconsciously reflecting them back. There are a lot of ways. One of the things I started looking at, as we were working on content, I was like, is this how I would want to be trained? Would I want the answer to be incorrect? This was very dismissive. I'm like, I don't know if that's like how I would give a learner feedback, right? Bart, right. You're laughing.
Yeah, that's probably not. There's pretty good evidence that that's actually not the best way that anybody learns, let alone adults. So yes, that's probably not the best way to teach people things. If you're teaching people how to be sadists, then maybe that's an appropriate learning tool. And I'm not even sure that's the best way to learn to be a sadist, to be quite honest.
Sadist pedagogy?
Yeah, I don't know.
Moist sadist pedagogy?
But there's really good research that shows that when people are highly anxious, their ability to learn goes down. Yes, anxiety affects performance.
And exactly the way you'd expect. So when we're dealing with a difficult topic and people are acquiring new skills, and it's a really specific clinical thing with high liability, you've got to have a few experts at the table. My experience of doing it was we might look at, we're like, oh, we have a certain setup. We want to train a certain skill. Everybody was in agreement. You could have a draft on it. And then we would be like, well, how is somebody going to learn that? Well, based on how someone's going to learn that, what should be happening on the screen? What should people be saying? How should we be coaching people with feedback? What should that look like? And so there were several layers of things, not just even writing a script. Like in a skit, you just have to worry about when one person says something, what you're going to say or do back, right? Well, there was sort of all the things that we were worried about. Additionally, you're going to have to deal with digital designers. And this was one of those things that it occurred to me that you had to have things pretty nailed down pretty far in advance for the digital designer. So if you're going to be putting a lot of money into a platform to do either, very complex avatars where you were going to be designing CGI, or if you're going to be doing, filming live action and having cutscenes, which would also sort of be avatar-based and immersive, you would have to have digital designers who would have to know how to edit what you were doing. And we would come across all sorts of sort of complicated, dilemmas. One of them was, well, what if, we want to represent a variety of demographics in terms of patients and providers. And we're only going to be doing a couple of scenarios. How do you demonstrate cultural competency and do inclusiveness when you're designing things? What if we want to edit what somebody, what if we create a platform and we run it by the decision makers, the reviewers, and they don't like something, but we've already filmed it? or we've already done the digital design for it. Like, so finding out ahead of time how malleable or how changeable or how editable is the platform that you're working on. Like those were really complicated. Can we stop here and pause, and do a poll or show them a form? Like if we're doing a suicide risk assessment and a doctor has a file, can we give them an electronic medical record and have them stop and search through it, and we'll ask them what kinds of things they'd want to look at? Well, the only way you know that is if you've got a digital designer, and if you as a subject matter expert or as a training expert can communicate to the digital designer where you're trying to go. And then they say, well, you could do it like this, or we'll show you an example of that. And that took more time than I realized it would take. Bart, I know this sounds like your idea of heaven, right?
It would be so much fun. I think one of the challenges is about having the right folks involved in the development process. So this is, and if you've ever done software development stuff, one of the things that you learn is that in the development process, you will make decisions early on that are often impossible to fix later on. And you might not know all the consequences of a decision that you've made. You may want it to do this thing for this reason, not realizing that may limit choices or how things work farther down the road. So anytime you're working with technology, that developing the specs and having buy-in, and also you've got to, if there are people with power that can shut things down, it's really good to have their approval ahead of time, because often you're not going to be able to fix things later on when people start throwing up red flags. It can be really messy and expensive. And there have been examples where that's occurred and a complete project has been shut down because of something that happened that they really didn't have a lot of control over down the line, right? So making sure that your team includes the types of folks that can help address those things up front, because once you start rolling and making technical choices, often you're stuck with what you have. Or it can be outrageously expensive to go back and try to fix those things, and that can be an end of your project right there.
It could be,
and that was one of those things.
It could be, but
go ahead.
I think something to keep in mind here too is that, especially in the technology realm, and using these types of digital tools, people are probably not going to be too unfamiliar with the iterative process, like having training 1.0, training 1.5. So you can create a lot of these tools on a fundamental basis. And then using that feedback, you can go back and start changing these things. Something like Cognito, I'm not even going to pretend to know how hard it would be to change anything in Cognito. But for something that's animated like that, you go back and you have your digital animator change a couple of things, and you put it in your text and you re-record a voice. And people are used to that. And if you're doing it in a way that's feedback from your clients, and making it better and more and stronger, I think people are generally okay with that. Now, if it's way more complicated than that, then I don't have any answers. But
one of the things that I learned from sort of my experiences this week was that the complexity of that really varied. So one of the questions that I really felt like it was important to ask at a lot of stages was, so, is this a decision that I need to get right at the beginning, or is this a decision that can, how hard is this to fix or change later? And so one of the skills I would, when we weren't sure about something, we would say, if we change our minds or we get different feedback, how fixable, changeable, or malleable is it later on the road at this decision point? And sometimes they'd be like, listen, it's going to cost a lot of money. Or they would say, oh, it costs a lot of money, so maybe we need to change how we do that. Like someone said, and I thought this was great. Do you guys, remember when on the Daily Show, when they would do those sort of wacky interviews with like Stephen Colbert or Samantha Bee or whatever, and the other person, and they would be filming from behind. They said, why don't we film the therapist from behind? So if you want to change the way a therapist asks a question, we don't have to change the graphics. We only have to do a voiceover. And they would talk you through like what is technically more flexible or changeable or what we can re-render easily, and what we can't re-render or we can't refilm very easily. Because if we do this and a year later everything changes and we have to get the same actor, but they left the state and they're 5 states away and they're doing another job, you just got to do something else, and that's really, really hard. So you have to get this part of the script right. But this thing, like if we use CGI animation, we just, all I have to do is go edit that line, and I could fix 3 different words, hit re-render, and an hour later I could have an entirely different simulation. And so really important to ask your digital designers, what are we doing, or what are our choices? And to the extent I think that you possibly can, make things flexible so that final product can be altered or changed. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. But this is good. This is really good design, and it's about getting your specs out and asking the right questions and having a good plan before you even start. And I think that this is a real challenge. Many agencies are not even remotely big enough to design their own avatar trainings. There's significant costs involved with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so
VA/DoD is a huge place, right? Cognito designs for whole states. Anyway, go ahead.
So I mean, and that's that's one of the real challenges, is that if you make it really specific, then it's really hard to translate to other places, right? So if you're a big agency like the VA, then you can do this sort of thing. If you're a smaller agency designing these sort of avatar-based trainings, that's big money for folks, right? And so having places like Cognito that can do this sort of thing, that translates well across agencies, or that can be easy to adapt for agency needs, right? Or is customizable for your needs, is really, really important. And I'm not sure that we really have a good example of that, right? Cognito's created a lot of really cool different versions, but I don't think that there's it's easy to customize that, but I don't know. I mean, those are great questions for Cognito, right?
I'm going to tell you, I was like, well, why can't we film, or why can't we do something with a green screen layer? And then, and then you could pop in different graphics, different labels. You could switch things up. I'm like, what could we do to build in flexibility so that we could make different editing choices down the road? And the extent to, I was really impressed at the variety of clever solutions that designers and media experts who had no knowledge about the mental health, or very little professional knowledge about mental health. And they would say, oh, we can do the video like this, so the design's cohesive, but we've got all these editing choices, and we can switch between real life and an avatar, and we could blend it, and here's how we would set that up so it looks cohesive. Oh, we could film from behind. These are the things that media experts, these are the problems they have experience solving, so you can ask all those things up front. We're getting closer to the time. Has Sally tweeted out yet? Before I'm going to jump in the next two.
Oh, they're getting close. Showtime.
They're getting really, really close.
I see Kevin Hines. I see John Draper. I see Sally
Are they tweeting?
Thomas. I see Misha. Yeah, there's a tweet out.
Yay! Look at that.
Anybody know what's
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, the 4 in the back on the left are all Lifeline folks, so that's really cool.
Oh, very cool.
Kevin, John. Who else is in there? Francis. Her head's right in the middle. How did I miss her?
And
Who else is in there?
Tom is in the back. Is Ario is behind John. That's awesome.
Wow, so cool. Okay, guys, it's almost time. So everybody, really, really quick, when you get a chance, go ahead and tweet out to the folks at the Grammy. So is there a hashtag? Can somebody tweet to Sally and say what hashtag should we use so that everybody will see it and retweet?
It's probably just Grammys.
Hashtag Grammys. So when we're looking at the avatar stuff, while we're waiting,
is trending. Yes. Grammy Awards 2018 is trending right now.
Hashtag Grammy Awards 2018, and then do hashtag SPSM and say look at all these great folks with lived experience. With lived experience of suicide, people who have survived suicide deaths and attempts, showing the importance of healing and recovery. Do a couple tweets out. Ask for some of the Grammy attendees, can you please help us amplify this by retweeting? Share the. I always worry about overburdening the call centers, but do share the number to the Lifeline. I think that's important to do. If you can, take a minute away from the live tweeting tonight and do that. On the digital, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the great things that Lifeline did in anticipation of this volume is there were lots of centers around the country, including Behavioral Health Response, my groovy little crisis center in St. Louis, where we brought in extra clinicians to man the phones to help with there will be a surge in calls with this number being out there so much. And so Lifeline was really thoughtful about this and helped get support for centers to get more staff on. And so there are actually, there's 160 roughly crisis lines right now who are getting ready for this increased volume. And some of those centers are actually going to do some extra backup and brought in extra staff just for this purpose. So that's very, very cool.
I think for those watching, one of the things to make everybody aware of is that the SAMHSA grantee, the Lifeline, is not one pot of money that funds all the call centers. That's sort of, they administer a government grant. All of these call centers are individually funded, like Bart's center. And Bart should not say these things, but I can say these things. And they're funded in different ways, but they're unique businesses, individually funded with their own staff. If you can, while it's great to donate to Lifeline, also consider volunteering or donating to your local call center, because anytime that we have this that does drive up help seeking, we really need to resource our local call centers to be able to staff up to take the volume. Bart, did I say that sort of rightish? I didn't break any rules?
You got it.
You did great. This is great. I just want to, Dr. Rob Kramer, who if you're not following Dr. Rob Kramer, I just forwarded did a tweet, a quote tweet. Apparently, they're working a grant that's under review that will develop a high-end clinical simulation that lots of people will be able to use. And so I told Dr. Kramer, we want to hear more about that. And so he doesn't know it yet, but he may, in fact, have be on the show at some point in the future.
Oh,
yeah, yeah. You heard me, Dr. Kramer, because that's super exciting stuff.
We're putting it on the Trello.
Yeah, put him on Trello. What are you going to do about that, Dr. Rob Kramer?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Amber Cannon. Thank you. This is my brave. We have a grant under review that'll develop. That's wonderful. And it's that high-end piece. So I'm going to talk about the last couple of technology pieces, and then we're going to probably wrap up to keep tweeting about the Grammys, right?
You're getting ready
tonight.
To go, it looks like.
I know. Couple more things to keep in mind very quickly. System and platform administration. So if you're doing a training, somebody's got to make sure that it runs correctly on the technology that people are using. So once we design all of this, it's got to be accessible, it's got to work, and bugs have got to be fixed, and those got to be rolled out to users. They have to get their accreditation. We would do all these things thinking about designing these complicated trainings, and then we would say, is this going to time out on the servers that the people are using to take the training? Because every once in a while we would come up with ideas so complicated that on the equipment people were using, where they would be, it was very likely to time out, and then people would not get credit. They would have to restart the training. You're going to have to talk to system administrators and platform administrators, and they have to be at the table to make sure that the user experience, like from a hardware standpoint, will work. You also have to talk about media and deployment and strategy experts, which is how are people going to find out about it? How are they going to take it? How are we going to share about this? How are people, to let people know that, like, especially if it's not a mandatory training, but you want to take it at scale, you have to include those people. Say, well, if we spend $1 million designing this really perfect training and only 6 people take it, they really should have hired Bart Andrews for $1 million to give them the role play of their lives. Right?
That is absolutely correct, April. $1 million for the role play of your life. Headed your way, SPSM.
Absolutely. And I know we're rolling into the Grammys and we're going to start talking about that exclusively, but one of the things that we want to make you aware of with all of this is that probably in the very near future, doing immersive virtual reality experiences is going to be something that's going to be more widely available. I know we have at our house, like the virtual reality sort of headset that you pop your phone into. Do you guys have that kind of those fun toys yet?
What do you think?
Or do you have fun toys? You have a little headset and you put your phone in, and then everything is a 3D immersive VR experience.
Do not have that toy.
They, like, a bunch of people sell them. You can buy them at gas stations now. That's how popular they are. They're just like, it's a little box. You pop your phone in, and it turns it into a VR experience.
Really? Mm-hmm. Have you done that?
Mm-hmm.
Have you?
I have not done it.
had the experience.
But I'm super excited to talk about VR at some point.
Yes. Well, it's going to be, I think, like a lot of these tools, when we were looking at some of the CGI tools, things that SPSM had used way back when we were doing CGI, and I had a little robot talking about suicide prevention, being a doctor, and I was like, look, I can program his gestures and everything. There's going to be highly immersive VR sort of DIY things. So there may be some DIY solutions that are fairly high tech, and the cost is going to be lower because development tools are going to be become, open to the public domain and designed for a general user. When that happens, are you thinking about that, or are we still designing, the static character and a text box sort of a la Oregon Trail, right? Oregon Trail, avatar-based.
I have to say this, Dr. Foreman. I am VR DIY AF all the time.
Now you have to dab.
Moist pedagogy.
Trusty robot.
What are the latest tweets? So we're in the last, I know this is when we start to do the wrap up, but really, are we watching it?
Right now. Logic is performing right now.
I can't, if I turn that on, the broadcast goes south. So you guys have to tell me.
They're all on there. They're all back there. Pretty awesome.
Are they on the stage? Who can see?
They're on stage. You can see all of them. Yep. There's a whole bunch of people.
That's pretty exciting stuff.
Oh, that is so amazing.
That is really, I mean, this is, this wouldn't have happened just a few years ago. This is a really big deal that, in fact, this sort of attention is being paid to suicide prevention. And Logic, who wrote this song, I mean, my kids love the song, right? So, I mean, this is just something that at a cultural level, people's awareness and willing to participate and embrace suicide prevention at a cultural level, it's something that's changing, and it's really good stuff.
I wonder, like, sometimes I wonder if this is what the folks, when Relay for Life really takes off, or when we have HIV related, awareness and activism, and it starts to become mainstream, and you were in the area, sort of in the prevention and treatment and research area. I wonder if that's what it felt like, if like we're sitting through a historic time where suddenly it really is understood to be, a medical, I hate to say medical because someone likes medical model, but it's considered a health issue like any other health issue, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe this is the time, and then people start funding it at the rate that it, at the level of its impact, and we start coming up with more ways to address this.
Is this our breast cancer awareness moment? Right?
Yeah.
Like, are we going to start seeing
Chris is frozen up.
He's frozen up with excitement, with energy, with passion. and I love this, that pillow, the square within a square pillow back there in the background.
Pillow. Yeah.
Very magnifique. It's very.
It's dab.
that Google ad I shared with you guys earlier. They just ran that.
You need to mention that. You need to mention that to the people.
I will. So there was a made by Google ad on Facebook earlier. That was an ad for the Lifeline. Again, a really awesome way to get the information out. When I had checked it, when I sent to you guys, it had 184,000 views. So doing a pretty good job of getting the word out.
That's amazing.
That is, the thing is, like, if you watch that, first of all, they have Google resources, but also it's not that complex of a messaging thing. There's a piece of it that's like the time is now kind of deal, like there's certain sort of zeitgeist around it. And then it was just being done, not by us talking to each other, but by the world deciding that they wanted to talk to each other, wanted to broadly say, this is important, get help if you need it. And I love that they were saying not everything looks like a status report, right?
It's great, and the ad that Chris is referring to is powerful. It's a positive message. People are smiling and happy. It's really interesting when you look at the cancer and cancer prevention marketing. They didn't show people in hospital beds filled with tubes who were gaunt and dying. That was not the message that they put out about cancer prevention. It was really about life and living life to your fullest, and let's make sure people have lives of quality, right? And so I think a lot of messaging in the past about mental health and about suicide has been really dour and lots of head clutching, or peekaboo, as I like to call it, right? Yeah, what is this? I've had so many clients that are just like this the whole session. Never flipping happened. I've been doing therapy in various degrees for 23 years. This is like not something that people are doing when they're, so it just irks me. So the message was was powerful and positive. Yeah, don't even, or the fetal position. It's like, apparently there's lots of people wrapped in fetal positions all over the place and nobody knows about it. Who knew? I didn't know. I missed it.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I will say when we were talking about the avatar-based training, I said, don't let them clutch their heads and don't make everything blood red.
Yes, good, good points.
Those are my two big designs.
And for that, you should get $1 million.
Right. We need to send all volunteers to the Grammys are sparking up numbers. I want to remind everybody that in the United States, at least, the Lifeline is a collection of independent call centers that rely on various funding streams at a local level and rely on local staff and local volunteers. If like the Lifeline sort of writ large is one thing, and that's a fine thing to donate to, but also consider donating your time and your resources to your local crisis center, because they're the folks who keep the doors open, the lights on, and the lines open.
Find out who your local crisis center is that's part of the Lifeline network. That would be a really good thing to do.
How do people do that, Bart?
That is a really good question, April.
I'll tweet the link. Tweet the link.
Tweet the link. That would be great.
if you go,
communication super time fun guy.
If you go, I'm sticking with that. I'm gonna get a badge. If you go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org, and then it's complicated. I'll send out the link.
That's what I was saying. That have that link handy.
That's fair.
So we're going to send out a link. We just want to remind people, we're so excited that something works. Like something like this in the Grammys works, and it works at a really large scale. And so, of course, now we have to escalate the amount of resources to match the need. And we want to remind people that the need is always there, whether or not the call volume is high. There's always a certain amount of need. So, you know, as it occurs to you to put your resources or vote for and advocate for things in your community that make your crisis and mental health infrastructure stronger, you can help people in need every single day. Just be a good member of your community and advocate for the resources your community needs to be, you know, a zero suicide community. Can I say a zero suicide community? That's not really a thing, but I'm making it a thing. Is that a thing, Bart?
Zero suicide safer community?
Suicide safer community is a living works term, and I love it.
Yes,
there are zero suicide facilities. But zero suicide is really an internally focused, agency-based, continuous quality improvement effort to make sure we're doing the best quality suicide prevention care inside of our healthcare settings.
In schools.
You're gonna, you know what, Chris Maxwell?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
We are past the hour. It's the Grammys. Do please help amplify those tweets tonight. We are so glad that you're here. Consider what as digital based learning platforms evolve and advance. Let's make sure that suicide prevention, either give $1 million to Bart to come do a role play in person, face to face, and knock your socks off. But let's consider also developing in the digital training resources that fit the scale of our problem, and let's consider developing the expertise to do that. Everybody have a great night. I give all the final thoughts. Hashtag SPSM.
Nice job, Lifeline. Thank you, Logic. Go suicide prevention. Go Grammys.
Woo-hoo, prevention.
Suicide